Parliament says it's working on a process to deal with former MPs implicated in the state capture report. The National Assembly's Legal Services Department has now formulated a possible plan giving guidance to how it should take the Zondo Commission's reports going forward. The inquiry has heard how Parliament failed to efficiently fulfill its oversight responsibilities during the so-called state capture years. So let's unpack the story now. We're joined by Stuart Mbanyele, who is a researcher with Good Governance Africa. We've also got the perspective of Themba Godi, who is former Scopa chairperson. To both of our guests, thanks very much indeed for coming on. And I suppose let's begin with you this morning, Themba, because you've got some important historical perspective, don't you, on the scathing words that the state capture inquiry had to say about Parliament's failure to execute its oversight duties.
Yeah, very true. And this morning I went to look at my presentation to the State Capture Commission, where I actually decried the fact that the executive did not display a genuine political will to solve problems of maladministration, but most importantly that Parliament did not have a track and monitoring system or did not adopt mechanisms to respond to an unresponsive executive. So I'm not surprised by the report of the Zondo Commission insofar as Parliament's effectiveness is concerned. And what is important will be how does Parliament respond. You'll recall that the Constitutional Court in the case of Gandla was very scathing about Parliament's role, and I did not see any substantive reaction to that ruling. Now I'm wondering how Parliament will react this time around.
Yeah. And I suppose, Stuart, the question is, because what Parliament is saying now is that its Legal Services Department is formulating this action plan on how to respond to the findings of the state capture inquiry. Did we need this action plan to be formulated when oversight is such a key responsibility of Parliament anyway?
I mean, it speaks to, as Themba mentioned now, how we've seen history is littered with examples of inaction on the part of Parliament. I mean, stemming from the Nkandla issue to now the whole state capture inquiry, and how the guardians themselves are sort of conflicted as well. So now it's going to be interesting to see how the process unfolds. But then there's a high level of partisanship in Parliament now, which speaks to a question of political will as well on the part of the Speaker of the National Assembly as well as the chairperson of the House as well. So I mean, history is littered with examples of inaction. So this process is unfortunately well overdue. But then,
Themba, a lot of people will say, perhaps in response to this latest development in Parliament, that given the kind of damage that was done to our country during the state capture years, that this might just be too little too late. What's your thoughts on that kind of viewpoint?
Well, Parliament will exist in perpetuity. All it can do is to continuously seek to improve on its work if it is a learning Parliament. I mean, look, Parliament is there to oversee the executive, fundamentally to ensure that services are timeously and qualitatively delivered to our people. But in most instances, we look at Parliament when there are corruption cases or when there are members of Parliament who are implicated, like in the report. You see that from the office of the Speaker, I think the chair responsible for oversight, Cedric Frolick's name, I think it's there. That's when we look up. But when we look at provision of services, like, for example, the crisis at Eskom, where is Parliament? What is Parliament doing? We have had load shedding for years. We continue to receive conflicting explanations from the minister, from management of Eskom. But where is Parliament? It's not there. So I think your question arises from the fact that we're always reacting we're reactive, things have happened, things have gone wrong, but what are the prospects and the chances of getting things right and being responsive to these kinds of reports? And I dare say that unless the political will is there, the Speaker and the chairperson of the NCOP are prepared to provide political leadership, to stand up and be the voice of Parliament, stand up in the interest of the people. I think we are just going to stumble from one crisis to the other. And lastly, you will recall that there was this audio clip of the president confirming some corruption cases involving his party. Parliament had an acid test. It failed. Why did it fail? Because there were those, especially in the majority party, who felt, no, you can't call the president to account. And if you fail there, then there's nothing else that you'll be able to stand up to. And we saw with the ESCOM saga where one of the board members said there is political interference from the executive in our work, and Parliament was not interested. So I'm just saying that your question does raise serious concerns about, we are in this terrible situation, but are we ever going to get out of it? Or are we doomed to be in this situation, especially if the ANC continues to be in power?
Yeah. I mean, what does that mean, Stuart, for everything that Themba has just said? He's named Cedric Frolick, who the third installment, I believe it was, of the State Capture Inquiry report recommended be investigated for corruption. Of course, Cedric Frolick is just one big name that is mentioned in that third installment of the report. We know that he now will head up that ad hoc committee looking into the floods in KwaZulu-Natal. He also, if memory serves, headed up what's now known as that sham ad hoc committee looking into the spending at Nkandla all of those years ago. What does all of this mean? On the one hand, the appointment of this legal services team to now look into how Parliament will respond to the State Capture Inquiry reports. But also these parallel legal investigations, the work of the NPA, for example, of how such cases move forward.
I mean, the jokes write themselves, as you just mentioned, how Cedric Frolick, who was fingered in the third installment of the State of Capture report, now is supposedly meant to chair Parliament's process into ensuring how funds are allocated to the KZN disaster aren't looted. But again, it speaks to a question of political will within the legislature, counterbalance that with the interface with the executive. And I mean, to be honest, I mean, it's going to be quite a contentious process, considering the fact that the ANC is also in full gear ahead of conference here and the electoral season. And we've got many people who have been mentioned in these reports that chair crucial legislature processes. I mean, from Mahuma Pelo to even now the Minister of Mineral Resources as well, who at the time was Party Secretary General, but now is the chairperson, but also has been mentioned in these reports. So I think the question of political war within the majority party is found wanting, and unfortunately, I do not foresee the situation changing. I think Parliament, as Mr. Godi would agree, that there needs to be high level of oversight and accountability on the part of MPs to effect the obligations to governance in the interests of the country instead of consistently towing the party line. I think this has been a perpetual learning process where the party has been found wanting, but now I think the Zondo Commission and the report now provides an opportunity to effect effective checks and balances and to do better to guard against such instances from happening in the future.
The jokes write themselves, except no one is laughing, Stuart. And again, this issue of party overstate comes up. Themba Godi, there's this now new process that is coming in insofar as legal services at Parliament is concerned, trying to act on what the Zondo Commission reports have said. But there are already existing punitive measures that are in place in Parliament, right? For example, against ministers whose departments don't deliver, like you mentioned at the start of our interview. Oversight for ministers who don't deliver on their mandates. I mean, as a start, we're talking about new measures now that will come in to sort of bolster Parliament's oversight mandate. But what about the existing oversight mandate? Are we using that?
Yeah, very true. I mean, I read that press release from Parliament. It's very confused. I can't say it's confusing. It didn't confuse me, but it is confused. Because on the one hand, it talks about the Rules Committee meeting to process this. It talks about a referral to the Ethics Committee. But like you correctly point out, the existing rules are very clear about what needs to be done in relation to members who transgress, but secondly and most importantly about ministers. And I think it is a small point that maybe has not been brought to the fore, that in terms of Parliament's oversight and accountability model, the Speaker is given the powers to actually name and shame ministers, call them to stand before Parliament and roast them if they're not responsive. Has that ever been used? No.
Yeah.
So it's not so much about crafting new processes. It's about using what exists now. And only in its full application can you say you have identified shortcomings. I think for me, that statement from Parliament is a reflection of confusion. It's a reflection of not knowing what to do, trying to buy time to figure out what to do, because as always, Parliament is caught napping.
Yeah. Stuart, your final comments, because this issue of oversight, that's really the big takeaway from our conversation today. And, you know, the question becomes, is parliamentary oversight, we've already talked about the issue of party oversight, but is parliamentary oversight more of just a political function?
Yeah, I mean, as correctly stated, I mean, you've got existing mechanisms, the Joint Committee on Ethics, the Rules Committees, the Powers and Privileges Committees as well. So these mechanisms exist. Now it's just the onus on Parliament to effectively use them. And as far as the political will is there, if Parliament is going to sort of use Stalingrad tactics until the President pronounces on the final reports on the matter, it remains to be seen. But then the statement is really vague and ambiguous in as far as what the Speaker intends on doing and what the House itself intends on doing. But then there needs to be sort of more of an active and advocacy role on the part of opposition parties as well as civil society to sort of encourage Parliament to take decisive measures against previous members and also current members, as well as members of the executive who continue to be mentioned in these reports. So I think for me that would be the main takeaway that sort of signals intent and purpose and as far as action is concerned.
Well, I think Themba Godi said it, didn't he? That statement from Parliament is confused. Well, let's wait and see. Parliament saying that it's working on this process to deal with former MPs implicated in the state capture report. Let me thank you both for your time this morning. Stuart Mbanyele is a Good Governance Africa researcher, and of course Themba Godi joining us there, former Scopa chairperson.